Imagine hearing God ask you to give up the very thing He promised you. That was the test Abraham faced. After waiting many years for the son God had promised, Abraham was told to take Isaac, the son he loved, and offer him as a sacrifice. It would become one of the greatest tests of faith recorded in the Bible. Welcome back for another devotional reading. The topic of focus today is the supreme test of Abraham's faith. And the scripture reading comes to us from Genesis chapter 22, and we will read verse 2. And it reads, And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. Let's begin the reading. In a vision of the night, in his home in Beersheba, when he was 120 years old, Abraham received the startling command, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. His son, his only son, the son of promise, to be sacrificed. There was no more sleep for Abraham that night. God had promised him that his name was to be perpetuated in Isaac, but here was a severe trial of his faith. Abraham had clung to the promise of a son from his own wife Sarah, and God had fulfilled his promise. He left Ishmael out of the question, saying, Thine only son Isaac. God had already told him that through Isaac his seed should be as the sand of the sea for multitude. As he stepped out into the night, he seemed to hear the divine voice that called him out of Chaldea 50 years before and said to him, Look now toward heaven and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them, so shall thy seed be. Can it be the same voice that commands him to slay his son? He remembered the promise, I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Is it not the voice of a stranger that commands him to offer his son as a sacrifice? Can God contradict himself? Shall he cut off the only hope of the fulfillment of the promise? Must he become childless? But Abraham does not reason. He obeys. His only hope is that the God who can do all things will raise his son from the dead. So the knife was raised, but it did not fall. God spoke, It is enough. The faith of the Father and the submission of the Son were fully tested. Now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. Abraham's test was the most severe that could ever come to a human being. Had he then turned from God, he would never have been registered as the father of the faithful. Had he deviated from God's command, the world would have lost this rich example of faith in God and victory over unbelief. Nothing is too precious to give to God. Confidence in the divine word will lead us to a doing of that word. Thank you so much for reading with me today. Let us just pause to reflect on the lesson that is in this story, because it reveals one of the most powerful lessons about faith. Remember, God had promised Abraham that through Isaac, his descendants would become a great nation. Yet now Abraham was asked to surrender the very son through whom that promise would be fulfilled. From a human perspective, The command seemed impossible to understand. But Abraham trusted the character of God more than he trusted his own understanding. He believed that the God who made the promise was able to keep it, even if it required a miracle. This story reminds us that faith is not only trusting God when everything makes sense. True faith is trusting Him even when we cannot see how His plan will unfold. So the question for each of us today is this: is there anything in our lives that we are unwilling to place completely in God's hands? As you listen to the closing hymn, Trust and Obey, may it remind us that when we truly trust God, we will also be willing to follow wherever He leads.
When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, what a glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Not a shadow can rise, not a cloud in the skies, but His smile quickly drives it away. Not a doubt nor a fear, not a sign nor a tear, can abide while we trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Not a burden we bear, not a sorrow we share, but our toil He doth richly repay. Not a grief nor a loss, not a frown nor a cross, but is best if we trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. But we never can prove the delights of His love until all on the altar we lay. For the favor He shows and the joy He bestows are for them who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Then in fellowship sweet we will sit at Christ's feet, or will walk by His side in the way. What He says we will do, where He sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey.